That's why we're having this debate and why we must have this debate, because the fiscal, and I say this with quotes because I'm not sure what the fiscal situation is of this state or the country, and we know it's in bad shape. But you're right about that. At some point in the short-term thinking, is going to kill, again, going back to the kind of the goose that lays the golden egg for these people. It doesn't seem like they're interested in anything longer than just, the end of this pay period. And that's scary. But again, as we've allowed organized labor officials to monopolize government and the bargaining privileges over government employees, this was a recipe that was cooked in, 30, 40, 50 years ago. In Ohio, it was cooked in 1984. That's when it started. So you're right. This gentleman, and then you next, okay?
You just a couple minutes ago, you highlighted a conflict in there. How, if I'm a cop, I can't strike, and I don't have binding arbitration, what's the answer?
Well, there are other impasse resolutions that are possible. I'm not sure. I mean, how do we settle those things in the private sector? I mean,
Right.
Well, that's right. And that's why I would say that collective bargaining in the public sector is wrong from the get-go.
Great.
And so,
what's the answer to that?
well, people talk to each other. I mean, police officers get together and say, here's what we have to have. And city councils, they get to redress their government as well, as far as who their bosses are. I mean, this is an interesting example of union officials send out brochures and say, hey, we can elect our own bosses. This is a pretty good business, in the public sector. The answer is just like we have in the private sector. I mean, except for in the private sector, strikes are allowed, but there's an inherent difference. In the private sector, there's a substitute good. Widget manufacturer A goes on strike. Widget manufacturer B continues to supply widgets. Widget manufacturer A loses market share, loses profitability, and may go out of business. In the public sector, there is no substitute for these goods, and therefore the demands. And so, what is the impasse resolution? What is the resolution system? It's what it is for employees of our company. I mean, we have 350 employees at Right to Work, and we sit down each year, we do a review, we talk about what their strengths, their weaknesses are, what we'd expect out of them the next year, what they did this year, and we talk about what we would review. And each individual employee is then adjudicated on what they've done. One of the things too in the government sector for police is they want us to negotiate over all 50 of them. They want all of them to get the same thing. And that's one of the inherent problems with the system, just like our education system. Merit pay is almost like a swear word in the educational system because they don't want to try to sort out who's the good teacher and who's the bad teacher and reward them accordingly. In the private sector, it's the leg operator. One guy makes 8 units an hour, another guy makes 4, but yet the guy that's 4 has been there a year longer and he makes more money. That system in and of itself doesn't work. There are ways. There's mediation. There's other ways to arbitrate individually. But when you want to apply this one-size-fits-all method to everybody, that's where you run into those troubles. And I don't know. I mean, I don't believe police officers should strike. I really don't. I believe they ought to be paid well. And we could probably pay them better if we just look at the other parts of government that are so inefficient and taking up more of the cost. I think we could be doing a whole lot better there. Ma'am.
Yes, about the education. To go back to that for a minute. Why is it that so many people now are homeschooling or putting their children in other school situations? The school system is failing us. It's failing our children. And I hate to say it, but it really is. It failed my son.
I think that's right. And I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. And one of them is kind of the rigidity that is installed there with, when you're negotiating over textbooks and staffing and class sizes and all these issues, and you turn it into a union negotiation as to how the school is going to run. I just don't think that works. And I think parents are responding as best they can. Back to your question, what kind of resolution system do you think we need for that? I don't have a good answer for you.
I don't know. That's why I asked you, because that seems to be, as I hear a lot of the dialogue and as you said, the rhetoric in Ohio. And what I also understand is one of the critical differences between Wisconsin and Ohio. I have heard other people say they support Wisconsin and can't support the Ohio because a cop can't strike and they don't have binding arbitration. The cop and the firefighter is now
Left
the
out
monopoly
the
on one side, doesn't have the monopoly on the other. It is a conundrum. So I don't have an answer. I don't know one. And I was curious with your expertise, if there was something.
Well, I can tell you about the Virginia example. We don't have any arbitration model. There's no impasse resolution model. There is a system, a personnel system in the government that works through this mediation process, just like we do in the private sector. And we do it at our organization, and other businesses do every day of the year. You know, I think we run the risk of saying, they're defending the status quo, and they're saying, we can't envision any other system that would do this. But before 1984, you were doing it right here in Ohio. I don't know how you were doing it, but you were doing it in Ohio. And those states that don't have statewide bargaining are doing it every day there. So there is a way to do it. It's just, it's very simple for them to throw, well, gosh, we don't have any rights at all, because we don't have the right to strike, and we don't have the right to arbitration or whatever. You know, 93% of the workers in America, private sector workers, somehow work through this process. I think we can do it. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Right, I said you're next. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, I just have a question. You think the unions are going to lose, but they're trying to go global, so I don't think they care about it.
Sylvia, I think that's a point well taken, and I think Richard Trumka has kind of spread that message that they're willing to let this go as long as they get positioned in a global world and a world government that is different than here. I mean, you know, one of the most important things that I can think of is our sovereignty as a nation, and it's being broken down every day. And I don't think organized labor is in the business of helping protect America's sovereignty. I don't believe that. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the educational system in Tip City, Ohio?
No, sir.
Okay, because it's my understanding that there is no required union membership in Tip City for teachers.
Mm-hmm. That's possible. That a locality would vote to have the bargaining law apply to them. If they weren't union, if they were independent teachers and hadn't unionized, then they would be doing negotiations with the principal and the superintendent and the school board outside of the context of Ohio law, I believe. You could do that.
But then they would be contributing to what the state collects for their pension.
I suspect, yeah. That's one of the interesting points. You make a good point. You know, union officials will say we're required to represent all these people. We're required to represent all these people. Therefore, ergo, because we provide them these benefits and services, they must pay us. Well, the fact is, and this is one of the real kind of shell games of the organized labor's arguments. They have lobbied for, and they will protect at all costs, their right of exclusive representation. Anybody ever negotiated a contract with a union in here before? Well, one of the things, okay, there you go. One of the things they always ask for is exclusive representation. So let's say we're a business and we're at the union hall, we're going to try to unionize and we're going to represent ourselves to our employer who lives down the street. And it looks like there's one more person on this side than there is on this side. So you guys all vote for union representation. You guys all vote no. Now what happens to all of us? We're all members of the union. We're not members of the union. We're all represented by the union. Why? Because union officials have established in the law, in the collective bargaining law, the bargaining law here in Ohio, that they will be the exclusive bargaining agent for all the workers in a bargaining unit, no matter whether they wanted it or not. These people all voted no, but yet they must accept me as their bargaining agent. Now, if any of you want to talk to the employer, get out. You can't do that. You got to do it through me. I have to be present, and I have to be the one to actually go to the employer and say, this is our grievance, this is our problem. You can't talk to him directly. If he talks to you directly, it's an unfair labor practice. He can be penalized for that. He can be fined for that. So I have to be your representative. Now you all say, well, you guys are all you all look like you're under about 25 years old. And you guys all look like you're over 55. Yeah, I'm sorry. Excuse me. You guys all look like you're over 55. You all look like you're over 55. Now, there are two issues left on the table, and forgive me for using kind of this lifeboat example. But here, there are two issues left on the table in our negotiation. One is a $5,000 cash payment, and the other is a $5,000 contribution to your retirement program. Tax-free. You over here have been driving by the Ford dealership every day on your way to work. You're 21 years old and there's a red Mustang convertible in that showcase. And that $5,000 would be a really nice way to put a down payment on that car and have that for Friday night. You, on the other hand, are 2 years away from retirement, 3 years away from retirement, and you're looking at the situation, you say, gosh, I plan on living until I'm 136. That's 55 years of no income. I would like a retirement benefit. Now, I know this is very simplistic, but we only get one. Now, you may be convinced, and I would convince you that the $5,000 contribution to your retirement program at 21 is going to be a good thing for you. I promise you. You'll appreciate it 45 years from now. You, on the other hand, over here, are going to appreciate it next week, maybe next month, because it, gives you a chance to put a little more money in the sock for when you're going to take it easy and relax. Not that any of you take it easy and relax in retirement. You can't do that anymore. So, have I given a benefit to each of you? In a way, yeah, I have. You don't know it. That's not what you wanted. But over here, you said, I don't want the $5,000. I mean, we're going to end up getting $2,875 anyway after taxes are taken out of it. And so I'd rather have the $5,000 in my IRA or my 401k or whatever, tax-free, and let that work for me. So we've established now that we don't have the same benefits, the same idea of what's beneficial to either of us. But yet, because of exclusive representation embedded in the law, protected by union officials, they apply it to all of us. And then they claim that everything we do benefits you. You get all these wonderful benefits. What we say to union officials is stop representing people that don't want you to represent them. Only represent those workers that want you, that ask for your representation, that voluntarily give up their rights to negotiate with the employer and say, you do it for me. But that's not good enough for him. That's what Gompers was crying for in the final years of his life. Don't do what I think you're going to do. And you're going to allow the government to give you the privilege to represent everybody. I mean, simplistically, we don't all have the same set of values and things that we value more than others. And I can't tell you what's beneficial to you, and you can't tell me what's beneficial to me. But yet, in a labor management relations system that we established in this country, somehow one person gets the voice over all of us, whether we want it or not. In the private sector, agency law, any lawyers in here? Any law students in here? What are the elements of a contract? Consideration. Meeting the minds, no duress, right? In labor policy, what are the elements of a contract? I say you're in. I say you're in. We have thrown out common law doctrine in labor management relations and given special privilege to a private organization, saying, I can get you in. I don't need, I force you to have consideration. We've never met, our minds have never met, and frankly, sometimes these people use duress. They do. So we created an entirely different agency doctrine or labor policy. And if you want me to stand up here and tell you what's good for you, I'll be glad to do that. There are countries all over the world that do that. And if you don't like it, you end up in the gulag. But in America, you have the right to decide for yourself what's right for you and what's wrong for you. And to give any private organization the privilege to impose that on you is wrong flat out. Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
You kind of indicated that Walker up in Wisconsin may be backsliding. Now, I saw a Reuters poll yesterday that showed that 67% of the public opposed what the demonstrators and Democrat senators are doing, and 25% of the public, only 25% was in favor. So with those kind of odds in his favor, with 67% of the public opposing the demonstrators, opposing the AWOL senators, this is a good thing for him. Why would he be backsliding?
Yeah. Let me, if I gave you that impression, I don't have any information that says he's going to. Generally what happens in these things, I don't think the Democrats are going to come back until something breaks one way or the other. I think Governor Walker, up to this point, what I mentioned was, I said he's stayed solid. I haven't read the headlines this morning, so I don't know if there's been a change up there. I don't want to say that Governor Walker's weakening at all. I don't think he is, personally. I think he's stayed strong and remains strong. And politically, it's working for him. I believe it will. The longer this goes on, the greater the support he's going to get. And I think the stronger he can get. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think he's, I mean, let me say this. The tendency of politicians is to answer the squeaky wheel. And right now, the other side is the squeaky wheel. But the longer it goes, I think the stronger he should get. The same with Casey. Most of the stuff on Senate Bill 5 that's been changing is there was the introduction of the bill, there was this hue and cry, and immediately there's things starting to change in the bill. I think Kasich has stayed strong on what he thinks he needs to have to run the state, but already that bill is kind of moving around. So I don't want to, and I need to be careful. I don't believe Scott Walker has backed off in any way. I think there are Republicans up there. There are 4 Republican senators now that are starting to kind of work around the edges, and I think there'll be efforts to do that. I think at this point Walker has stayed extremely firm and said so. So I apologize if I made that impression, I was wrong. That would be wrong for me to say, I don't have information that indicates that. Okay, yes ma'am?
Can you address, well, I'm a political newbie, and I think a lot of us spend our life's work time on our job and don't look at the big picture of where things are. It was absolutely astounding to me last year that NEA contributed $1 million to one representative in the state, Bo-Cherry. Anybody but Bo-Cherry is why I was in this race, trying to make a difference. But I didn't get the idea of the money laundering aspect of this in terms of just enshrining the Democratic Party with our funds with no say-so. And I think that is huge. Can you just talk about the money laundering?
Absolutely. Organized labor is a $20 billion a year business. Their dues revenue and their total revenue is about $20 billion. They collect $20 billion. They collect about $9 billion a year in union dues. About 80% of that, or about $8 billion, comes from workers who are under contracts that say you must pay to keep your job. So about $8 billion comes from compulsory dues contracts. I'm not saying that that $8 billion would immediately go away if we passed a right to work law. It would not, because there's a lot of people that love their unions. Unions are doing good work for them. They spend about $1 billion every 2 years on federal politics alone, about $1 billion. I mean, 2 unions in the Obama administration, during Obama's election in 2008, admitted publicly that they spent over $400 million to elect just the President of the United States. Just 2 unions. And there are 56 unions under the AFL-CIO umbrella. And but the reason they do this is because, as I mentioned, they are wards of the state now. Their power is resident in government. And so the funnel point for them is who is in Columbus and who is in Washington, D.C. Because they're so susceptible to any change in the public policy process that changes their business model as opposed to selling their product to workers. About anywhere from 92 to 95% of all political contributions from labor unions go to Democrats. And that's while...
Shouldn't that be illegal?
Not in a perfect world it should be. You should be able to speak however you want. The question is, what happened with you is exactly what ought to happen in the marketplace. Is you ask yourself, why would this Cherry guy get $1 million from the NEA? Why would they want to give him $1 million? And that should be enough. That disclosure of that and the awareness of that should be enough to say, I don't want anything to do with that guy. You know, so what we've done in government with campaign finance is we've regulated it. We said the solution is government regulation. That's not the solution at all. The solution is always immediate disclosure and unlimited activity. We need to know why a corporation would give someone $1 million. Those are good questions, and the more we know about why they do that, the better off we are. I mean, it's not the campaign finance system is not a perfect system, but it certainly hasn't been perfect since 1976 when the government said that money was corrupting and therefore we can regulate it. And now we're on this slippery slope down to the point where we talk about publicly financed elections. That's malarkey. That's malarkey, frankly. What we need to do is we need to, a bank robber, we have laws against robbing banks, okay? We have systems in place to stop the bank robber from getting the money in the first place, right? We have cameras, we have security guards, we have systems. But in organized labor, we let them take the money first, and then we say, okay, you did something wrong that you spent it on politics that people disagree with, now give it back. And they say, well, okay, well, they got all the money in the first place, and then they give back some of it. In Ohio, we're down to a point where I think they give, if you object politically to the OEA's agenda, you get, I think, 50% of your money back or whatever. That's still not right, because you pay a penny to keep your job. That's wrong on principle. But part of the litigation, a lot of the litigation we do on behalf of employees is based on that premise. That's one of the stools of compulsory unionism, and one of the problems with it is the forced political conformity that comes out of it. Thomas Jefferson said to compel a man to furnish support for ideas he opposes is sinful and tyrannical. It is, and we should never force you to pay for causes and ideals you don't support. That case, that phone worker on the telephone pole in the plot in Ireland, that was that case. And we won that at the Supreme Court. Those rights are available to you. Unfortunately, they're not self-executed. You have to go out and say, I believe you're spending my money on politics. They say, no, we don't spend any money on politics. You say, I don't believe it. They say, prove it. And you're one person versus their battery of lawyers. No offense to lawyers, we have an attorney in there now. And a counselor. And then you fight, and it goes on for 3 years or 4 years, and you're fighting over $35. You're fighting over $118. It's a hard situation. We got to stop the compulsion. You stop the bank robber from taking the money in the first place, and union officials only get the money that people give to them voluntarily. Period. That's the solution. Jim, how we doing? Looks like we still got a lot of interest here. Are
Yeah, we do. We're just about out of time. About one more thing.
One more, right there.
I just want to know, what can we do today as a person to help rectify this?
Well, you need to be involved in what's going to happen in Columbus this week. And I know this sounds so kind of just generic, but you've got to be in touch with your politicians. The first thing that a politician thinks about after they get elected is what? When people start getting angry with them, what do? They start changing, they start moving. You know, in any given legislative body, there's 100 people. For math purposes, let's make it simple for me. Any legislative body, there are 100 people. There are 25 people that are on your side all the time. You don't need to worry about them. They're right on the issues. They're good on principle. You need to make sure you thank them from time to time for doing the good things. On the other side, there's 35 that are against you every step of the way, every time. They're counted on. They're Ted Kennedys. They're Charlie Schumers. They're
Sharon Brown.
There's Sharon Brown, yeah, there you go. I was going to be careful there, he may be in the room or one of his cousins. So there's 35 of those, so now we're up to what, 25 and 35 is 60, right? Okay, you gotta help me with this, I'm serious, you gotta help me with this. So we're up to 60, so 60% of the legislative body we can't do anything about, but there's 40 left. And ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you, in 25 years of doing this, they literally are right here like this. You know, if you're a sailing man, you know the telltales on your sail tell you if you're going on the right course. Well, finger in the wind works for these guys in Columbus. And they are responsive to grassroots pressure. They are responsive to contact, they are responsive. And you may think that little postcard, or that little phone call, or that little petition, that little fax you send doesn't have it make any difference, but I will tell you it does. And they measure that stuff. And I won't say they're as spineless to do what you say at any given moment, they change their best, but they do change their behavior. And they change their behavior based on the activity level and the intensity level of what you're going to do. And so, Senate Bill 5, you've got to be involved in the fight. If your senator's good, tell him to stay strong. Don't say he's a great guy. Don't say they're a great guy. Because as soon as you tell somebody they're a great guy, what do? They run over to the other side and say, hey, how can I be a great guy for you too? So be careful. We have a saying at Right to Work, and this is you can turn the camera off just for 1 minute, because this is off the record.
How do you follow and act like that? Mark, that was a real treat to hear you speaking this morning. I think we all learned a lot from it. Hopefully you'll be able to stick around for a couple. Okay, announcements. We've got plenty of announcements. I see David Frost is in the room. Yeah, we got two Frosts. We got a David Frost back here and a Robert Frost back here. Robert, if you have something you want to say, you can speak too. But David Frost is one of our volunteers, and he had something to say.
Good morning. Another Frost. I'm glad there's two of us. Are you Rob from Cuyahoga? I am. We met at CBR. Very good to see you again. Yep. Okay, this is my version of the Glenn Beck chalkboard. Some of it is going to be kind of repetitive from what you just heard, but I'm going to try and connect some dots. This listing up here is the compilation of a whole bunch of folks that belong to a thing called movement.org. You may have heard about some of them. Basically, some of the folks in